How did Sokka die? This is a question that's been in the fandom for so many years, ever since The Legend of Korra episode 1 came out, and we found out tragically that Sokka was already dead by the time Korra was ready to venture into the world. Well, what happened to him might be one of the most tragic deaths in Avatar, but also one of the most fitting. So hit that subscribe button and let's get into it. The Legend of Korra picks up around 70 years after Aang and the rest of Team Avatar end the 100-Year War. By the time it starts, the original gang have built an entire new world. Republic City exists, there's a whole political order with councils and borders and treaties that nobody had even thought of back when Sokka was still a teenager and trying to flirt with the Moon Spirit. And Sokka helped build all of this. He served as the chief of the Southern Water Tribe, and he also sat on the United Republic Council as its chairman. He presided over the single most important criminal trial in the entire history of Republic City. And we get to see that in a flashback in The Legend of Korra. But then, somewhere before Korra is old enough to even leave the compound, he's just dead. He's gone. And that leads us into the first theory of what actually happened to him. And that is that the Red Lotus killed him. This is the theory that refuses to die. It's one of the most popular in the fandom, and it actually makes a whole lot of sense. In 158 AG, Zahir and the Red Lotus make their first attempt on the new Avatar. They infiltrate the Southern Water Tribe and try to kidnap Korra as a small child. Sokka is there alongside Tonraq and a handful of White Lotus sentries and the Tribal Guard. He's explicitly credited in Korra Season 3 as one of the people who fought off the Red Lotus and saved Korra's life. She was about to be killed. The Red Lotus wanted to kill Korra. They did this because they wanted to end the Avatar cycle. They believed that the Avatar was an obstacle to true freedom, and that by ending the Avatar cycle they could bring true chaos to the world, which would ultimately allow for everyone to live in true freedom. Unfortunately, after that event, that is the final confirmed appearance of Sokka alive in any canonical source. He's not in the comics after this point, he's not in the books, and of course he's not in any of the TV shows. And then very shortly after that, Tonraq is suddenly chief of the Southern Water Tribe. That's the job that Sokka had been holding. Now, chieftainships in the water tribes don't casually change hands, especially not in the tribe where the position had been moving through Sokka's family probably for generations, and at least since his father Hakoda. A sudden succession of that kind almost always means the previous chief has died and there are no further heirs to take the role in Sokka's family. And this also ties in with the theory that Sokka was the father of one of Toph's children. Toph, of course, only had female children. Obviously, a female can't take the chieftainship of the Southern Water Tribe, as this is a male-only position, so that even further ties in with that theory. And to further that, I'm going to give you a theory that's been going rampant through the Avatar community for many years. So here it goes. The reason we haven't heard from Sokka and Suki's kids anywhere in the canon is because there's still bad blood between them and the rest of the gang's kids over what happened with their father. Sokka died defending Korra from Zahir and the other Red Lotus, but then in the aftermath, Unalaq declared that he would rule the South Pole from now on. As we know from The Legend of Korra, there was huge shenanigans with Unalaq taking control of both the North and the Southern Tribe. And obviously Tenzin and Tonraq are obviously incredibly unhappy with this. And that is why we haven't heard from Sokka and Suki's son, because he was actually the heir to the Southern Tribe, but because of this monstrous grab of power from Unalaq, their son was never given his rightful place as the chief of the South. Tenzin and Tonraq are unable to stop this monstrous grab of power, resulting in a bitter falling out with Suki and her children. Suki simply can't forgive Tenzin and Tonraq for, first of all, not stopping this power grab, but also for allowing Sokka to die in the first place, even though it's not their fault. And then they go their own ways, and we never see them again. And that would leave them on Kyoshi Island during the time of The Legend of Korra, and obviously we didn't get to see that. Now let's look at who Sokka was fighting in this Red Lotus encounter. Zahir is a confirmed murderer, there's no question about that. He kills the Earth Queen on screen in Book 3 of Korra, and the only reason he doesn't kill Korra herself is that Suyin Beifong shows up at the last possible second. And then there's also Pli, the lover of Zahir, and she's a combustion bender powerful enough to level a building in a single shot. And then there's Ghazan, who can liquefy stone, Minghua, who fights with 6 water tentacles and has combat experience going back decades. This was the most formidable set of opponents that Sokka could ever face. And not to mention, Sokka walked into that fight as a 74-year-old non-bender with a boomerang and a sword. The idea that he walked out without serious injuries is already a stretch. The idea that he walked out completely fine and then happened to die of unrelated natural causes in the next few years doesn't make any sense. What most likely happened is that Zuko and Sokka went in to fight the Red Lotus to protect Korra, and that he took a severe injury during this fight. And unfortunately, he probably never recovered for that and probably died from his injuries. And that leads us to theory 2. He simply died of old age. This is the least exciting answer, and it's also the one that the showrunners seem the most comfortable leaving as the default until they figure out what to do with him in the comics. We already know that Sokka was alive in 158 AG during the Red Lotus attack. That is where we know he was confirmed to have been in the canon. At that point, he was 74. By the time Korra's main story kicks off in 170 AG, he would be somewhere in his mid-80s if he'd made it that long. Of course, he didn't. The problem is that people in the Avatar universe don't really die at normal ages. Kyoshi made it to 230, Bumi was 112, still doing earthbending demonstrations for tourists. Katara is easily pushing 90 during Korra, and she's still fully lucid and she's better than ever at healing. And on top of all of that, Zuko is the same age pretty much, even a bit older, and he had the most stressful job of all as the Fire Lord, and he was still kicking it during Korra. So for me, I don't think Sokka went out of old age, because the healthcare was obviously improving when Republic City came along and healing was getting better and better. So to me, it doesn't make much sense, but it is still possible. And that leads us on to the next theory. Theory number 3, Yokone's bloodbending caught up with him and killed him. Let's rewind back to 120 AG. This is where Sokka is in his mid-40s and serving as the chairman of the United Republic Council. During this time, a crime lord named Yokone is on trial for bloodbending, which everyone in the room believes is impossible outside of a full moon. Now, in case you don't know, Katara made bloodbending illegal because obviously she was horrified by it after her encounter with Hama in the Puppet Master episode in the original series. During Yokone's trial for bloodbending, Sokka is the one who connects all of the dots. He's the one that's able to connect the dots and figure out how Yokone was able to do this by pointing to Toph's metal bending, to Combustion Man's mental firebending, and argues that Yokone is one of those rare benders who has figured out how to do the impossible. And because of that, he delivered a guilty verdict to Yokone himself. But the second Sokka finishes talking, Yokone bloodbends the entire courtroom, even Aang, Toph, and the other councilmen, and they're absolutely powerless to stop it. Yokone even bloodbends his own lawyer, and Sokka, of course, is one of the people who was bloodbent. Aang eventually was able to break free in the Avatar state and ends the fight, but for a short critical window, Yokone has total psychic control over Sokka's blood, muscles, and nervous system. This is where the theory gets its real teeth. Psychic bloodbending seems to have an effect on people that isn't immediately visible. It seems to do very, very deep damage to their body. We see that Korra suffers lasting psychological trauma after being bloodbent by Tarlok and Aman, and there's a growing argument online that's really taking off in the fandom that the physical version of this damage is also real. The theory states that this type of bloodbending can cause cardiovascular stress, micro tears in tissue, lingering effects on the nervous system, and also damage to the brain. Sokka was the only non-bender in that courtroom, at least that we know of, and benders already have a degree of natural resistance to having their chi manipulated because they've been training their whole lives to manipulate their own chi. Sokka had none of that protection, none of that training. And nobody in 128 AG has any medical framework for diagnosing, yet alone treating the after effects of bloodbending. So under this theory, Sokka was dead the moment Yokone did that to him, although he didn't know it yet. He walked out of that courtroom with a clock ticking, ready for his death. And that brings us to the last and final theory, is that Sokka went out with a warrior's death that nobody wrote down. Sokka spent his entire life protecting people. He left home at 15 to fight a war that he had no business winning. He invaded the Fire Nation and he built hot air balloons. He took down an entire fleet of airships with one sword while he was almost certain to die. So instead of Sokka going out dying peacefully in bed at 75 with a blanket over his chin, that doesn't really make sense for his personality. Instead, he may have gone out as a warrior fighting in battle with one final battle cry, maybe even saving someone he loved. That is a fitting and perfect death for Sokka. Actually, the most popular version of this theory says that he went out as a warrior protecting Suki in her final moments. On the battlefield, he went down to protect Suki. He jumped in front of a sword or jumped in front of an arrow and saved her life. And that would be the most poetic ending possible for Sokka. If you enjoy videos like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button as there will be plenty more on the channel, and check out the ones on screen now. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.